Putting a human face on the crisis as we begin to talk now about the numbers needed in terms of financial help for these low middle income countries. Let me go straight now to Kristalina Georgieva. You are the Chief Executive Officer of the World Bank, having served previously as European Commissioner for Budget and Human Resources, tripling, in effect, the budget that Europe had to be able to deal with the influx of refugees into Europe itself. Many will say that this is probably also why we are talking now so much about the refugee crisis to begin with. But looking at the more immediate concerns for countries in the region, there is, of course, the question of financial resources, but there's also the question of capacity of these countries like Jordan and Lebanon to cope, to absorb the impact of such massive influxes. How much of an impact has these refugee crises had on countries like this, and how much has the GCFF been able to help?
Thank you very much for bringing us together, and to all in the audience, very impressive, joining this conversation. This is the evidence of how significant it is. Before I answer your questions, could I ask for the Lebanese and Jordanians in the audience to please raise your hand? Even better, stand up. Well, raise your hand. Let's not make it. What I want to say first is that Lebanon and Jordan, the Lebanese and the Jordanian people, have opened their hearts and their homes to accommodate the victims of a horrible war in the hundreds of thousands. And all we need to do in the rest of the world is just to open our wallets. Is this too much to ask? And in conviction that it is not, we at the World Bank, and actually when that started, I was in the European Commission with exactly the same idea. We thought that we have a very significant dual problem to solve. One, the pressure on services, on water, in water-scarce region, on housing, on infrastructure, on jobs is immense, and it has to be eased. But two, we cannot only help the refugees. What about the communities that are hosting them? So the World Bank came up with a very commonsensical proposal that, despite of the fact these are middle-income countries and they are not eligible for concessional finance, we ought to find a way to bring costs of borrowing significantly down so the two countries can invest in projects that accommodate the needs of their populations and the huge increase of refugees. A year ago, 1 year ago, the World Bank created the global facility. 1 year later, we have $1 billion to show for it. 5 years, we aim to get to 6 billion. And with the generosity of those here and others, I'm confident we can get there.
But just to specify, you need to get to 1 billion in grants, not,
Yes.
not
So,
in concessional financing
good.
only. Can you get to that for the long-term response that is needed?
Well, this brings memories from another era, but yes, we can.
Okay.
Where we are today is we have received pledges for $350 million. Out of it, $250 million is being paid. That has allowed us to go up to $1 billion in concessional finance. Just yesterday, you saw on the screen there are health projects proposed. They were approved. And that is actually a significant feature of very quick action that we have in the facility. So we have, in concessional terms, we have another $650 million to go. And let's hope that we may be able to make progress during the spring meetings for that.
Thank you, Ms. Georgieva. You bring up a few important points, and you also highlight the generosity of host countries themselves, calling on the rich developed world to do even more, even though we have gotten, as you say, to the 1 billion in concessional financing. The two countries with the largest Syrian refugee populations in relation to their own populations are Jordan and Lebanon. Jordan hosting some 700,000 Syrian refugees, and I turn to Imad Fakhouri, who is the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation of Jordan. That's about 10% of Jordan's population, most of them living in mega refugee camps. A lot of us have seen pictures of the Zatari camp with some 80,000 refugees, mainly women and children, living there. You helped lead the discussions on the GCFF. Has it lived up to what it was built to? I mean, are you happy with the results you've seen? And give us a sense of how much of an impact the crisis has had on Jordan.
Thank you very much. I think we're here today as part of a series of paradigm shifts that have been taking place in dealing with the crisis. The first one has been a great recognition, and I want to thank Kristalina and everyone and all the donor countries that there has to be a fair burden sharing. The second one is that the biggest donors are actually the host countries hosting the refugees. And this has been a transformation in developmental thinking. And the third part is understanding the time, the scale, and the carrying capacity of host countries in dealing with this crisis. To put this in context, Jordan is hosting today 1.3 million Syrians in total, only half of which, close to the 700,000, are registered refugees. This is about a 14% increase in total population, or a 20% increase in the Jordanian population. 90% of those Syrians, or 80% of the registered Syrians, are outside the camps. And think about then a country now we're in the 7th year, we're growing at 1/3 the rate for 5-6 continuous years. We've have, because of the low growth, less tax revenue. We're incurring more deficits. We're getting debt to GDP to rise faster. Your fiscal space is disappearing. That's on one end. Then you have an increase of about, over the past 5-6 years, 25% in unemployment, a 30% increase in poverty. And that's the context we're dealing with. And that's a context where, on the other hand, we're actually providing public services to 1.3 million Syrian that exist in the country. We've absorbed 90% of Syrian boys and girls in public schools, formal, informal types of education. We actually have a situation where donors, the UN and the government of Jordan, are chasing Syrian families to make sure that we get as many of their kids back in schools. We've serviced 1.8 million Syrians who've come for healthcare visits, from surgeries to minor things to vaccinations, and so on and so on. Just to give you the profiles. On average, we are facing about a $2 billion annual needs and costs to this crisis. And the question becomes then, if you are a country that's doing the right thing, the noble thing, and you've done this not the first time, we've done this over the many decades, where Jordan has a total registered number of refugees of 2.8 million across the many decades, which brings it to a ratio of 43% to our Jordanian population. And that puts us probably number one in the world in terms of dealing with that situation.
Thank you for making the distinction between the numbers, because as you say, the lower numbers tend to be the registered refugee numbers. And of course, the reality is much different. Of course, not to be unfair to a country like Jordan, which already has a lot of its own issues to deal with. You are providing, as you say, employment opportunities where you can access to education, but there is still what some people call the humanitarian silo. Professor Collier of University of Oxford, you're well familiar with, says that you and other countries should be utilizing the benefit that some refugees can provide by allowing them to enter the labor market, by allowing them to provide their skills, using them as an asset, not seeing them essentially as a burden. You talk about the transformation in developmental thinking. Is there a transformation also in the humanitarian silo thinking?
Absolutely, and I think Jordan has been the case study, fortunately, to demonstrate for the world of how you go and transform this humanitarian refugee challenge into a holistic development opportunity. This is exactly what we did with the help of the donors, where Jordan, through a nationally led process, went to the London conference last year in February, proposing a holistic approach of looking at the refugees as an economic input, as a surplus labor pool that has skills that can contribute economically to the economy. And we designed a program that would allow us to grow the economy, take advantage of the skill sets of the refugees in a way that complements the Jordanian job creation. And we were lucky because the majority of the skill sets of the Syrian refugees would actually complement Jordan in areas where we have tended to import labor. So it created a potential for a bigger win-win for the overall economy. And 1 year into this compact, out of which the facility grew as one of the tools to help us deal with the financing gaps we are proud to report that we have about 40, close to 49 as of end of last week, 49,000 Syrians who have legal work permits in Jordan, who are working in jobs that are complementing Jordanian job creation. And we are looking at home-based businesses. We are looking at startup businesses inside the camps also that are trading and integrating economically with the rest of the economy. But the key message in all of this, this is a holistic approach. If the totality of it doesn't work, it will be unbalanced. It will collapse.
A holistic
and the concessionary financing facility is one critical element that plugs this gap, that allows us to grow the overall economy, that allows us to attract new investments and to deal with that. If these things are not all going in parallel tracks, it will be very difficult to sustain this paradigm shift.
Thank you so so much. I'll have to just stop you there. But as you say, it has to be a holistic approach, but also a global approach. And this is where the GCFF comes in. Of course, the GCFF can only be as effective as the level of support, financial support it gets from countries and others. Since its launch last year, 9 countries, in addition to the European Commission, have made pledges and payments. A country that has played a central role in Europe's response to the Syrian refugee crisis and is one of the strongest advocates of the GCFF is Sweden. Isabella Lövin, you are Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for International Development Cooperation of Sweden, Climate Minister as well. Many of us remember you from that photo that went viral of you signing the climate deal, but I won't dwell. I should say surrounded by a lot of women, but I won't let my feminist or other instincts take over. But just to say that Isabella Lövin is here. How would you describe your country's strategy on a serious note for Syria? How important is it for countries like yours to support this type of mechanism?
Of course, it's very, very important, and Sweden has also taken in very many refugees from Syria and from all over the world. In 2015, we had 163,000 asylum seekers in Sweden, and we're of course a rich country, but we also see that it takes a lot of resources in order to really accommodate all these refugees, and since the world has now a completely unprecedented number of refugees, we need to support, of course, also middle-income countries that take this enormous responsibility. It's really a global good. And we decided, we were here 1 year ago, we decided immediately to support this mechanism. And I think it's really, really fantastic that it delivers. And that the World Bank and the MDBs and the UN and donors together can actually make it possible to do this holistic, let's say, the development opportunity of refugees, because refugees are not only a burden, they also are a possibility and an opportunity to develop an economy of a hosting country, and Sweden is also proof of that.
And are European countries beginning to do more? I think Sweden has pledged something like 40 million. Generous support in some way, but many would say just a drop in the ocean when you consider the large scheme of things and how much help these refugees and, more importantly, the host countries need in the long term, because it doesn't seem like refugees will be going back to Syria anytime soon, even if the guns stop tomorrow because of the level of destruction. So in terms of a long-term approach, are we seeing enough being done by European countries?
Well, we need to work on the root causes, of course. I mean, it's not acceptable that this war is going on and on and on for all these years. So we need financial support, but we also need political will, and we need more political efforts in order to stop these wars. But in the meantime, we need to do everything so that all these millions of young children and families have a possibility to form their future and have a hope for a future. And it's Jordan and Lebanon are taking fantastic responsibility for this immediate crisis, but there's so many other middle-income countries that also host very large communities of refugees. Therefore, Sweden now decided to support the new window in this fund by $10 million. in addition to the 40 million US dollars.
So thank you for that, and hopefully that will spur more donors to actually invest more in this very important fund. Looking now at another country that has been so deeply affected by this crisis, according to UNHCR, even though I hate to give numbers, but over 1.1 million registered, I say registered refugees, half of them children, are in Lebanon. Another similar number, perhaps, of non-registered Syrian refugees are in the country. Some initially there as migrants, that in addition to the very many Palestinian refugees who've been there for years. This extraordinary influx of refugees, just to put it in a little bit of context, would be something like 65 million, I believe. 65 million refugees here in the US, or a staggering 240 million in China. So this is how much Lebanon is taking. A third, some would even say a quarter of the population, which is 4.5 million in the case of Lebanon. Hassan Hasbani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Public Health of Lebanon, the figures, the ratios, I think, speak for themselves. GCFF is doing quite a bit to help Lebanon. I know that there have been projects to do with transport infrastructure, employment projects as well to help the Syrians and the Lebanese in the country, another project to enhance the resilience of the healthcare system. How far does it all go, though, in meeting Lebanon's needs? Is it substantial enough, or is it more on the symbolic side?
Well, thank you for this opening. Actually, just to correct a few numbers, for the non-official or unofficial, unregistered numbers, the percentage is actually the highest per capita in the world. We're talking about 30 to 40% of the population. So this is actually equivalent to more than 100 million people landing in the United States over a period of 3 years. Or just to put it into perspective, that's about 24 to 30 million coming to Canada in 3 years, or 10 million to Germany, and expecting the world to ask Canada or the US or Germany to find them employment opportunities, feed them, give them services, and treat them equally to their citizens. That's a colossal scale. That's a virtual impossibility, and let's face the truth. We're all doing our best to do that. But classical and traditional indicators for refugee situation and for dealing with refugee situations cannot be applied simply to the case of Lebanon and Jordan particularly because of the sheer scale of the problem. So we need to be creative. We need to go outside the box and find solutions. We have 500,000 youth unemployed. 30% of the youth in Lebanon are unemployed, and 50% of the Syrian youth, that's between 18 and 24 years old, are unemployed. This is a virtual time bomb. This is creating a lot of discontent and major issues at a social level. This is a global problem. It's not a Lebanese problem. The GCFF has been quite generous and quite creative. The donors have been very active and supportive. That has brought a lot of cooperation and visibility to the problem. However, it still falls short of what is needed. We have very ambitious programs and plans for Lebanon to be able to deal with this global situation, but a global situation like this needs a bigger and more aggressive global solution.
So you need more help from the international community. Refugees, I think, as you allude to as well, especially in the case of Lebanon, we've seen starts usually as a short-term crisis, but ends up being a very long-term issue for countries. You don't have the adequate international support, you say, but beyond the financial burdens that can be shared by others. To what extent is Lebanon dealing with the political barriers that face refugees in your country that simply do not have access, for political reasons, many would argue, to the job opportunities that they need, the bureaucracy, the legal hurdles? What are you doing about those?
Well, again, this is the indicators I was actually talking about. If we use global standard indicators, the system stands to face many issues and problems. We could face a major social collapse, creating a bigger problem than the Syrian refugee problem in Lebanon. So we have opened up the opportunity to provide work permits. This is not alien to Lebanon because Syrians have always worked in Lebanon as a workforce, but now the numbers are simply much, much bigger than before. We're allowing this, but we're also dealing with a major discontent on the local population. Not just on the work side, but also on services. I'll give you an example. As a health minister, we see about 40% rejection rates in intensive care and pediatric intensive care for the Lebanese. So the Lebanese population is being denied a basic service because of the existence of a large number of Syrian refugees. And that has to be dealt with very, very carefully. That could create political problems, but the resilience of the system has allowed so far to accommodate for all this demand. What I'm saying is we have a plan of about $10 billion of investments that need to be put in the Lebanese infrastructure to bring it up to the needed capacity to cater for this amount of additional people. $10 billion, which needs to come in its vast majority in grants, because Lebanon is effectively the third country in the world in terms of debt to GDP. So if we don't get this kind of global support, the situation stands to deteriorate, and deteriorate significantly, as we have a high level of birth rates. We have an increasing level of demand on services and infrastructure, and a potential discontent at the popular level. I just want to thank the donor community, but I would like to remind them of one thing, that this is a collective global problem. We need to step up the support as much as you can, and we need to keep this in mind even when the conflict in Syria is resolved, because it is going to take some time for those people to safely return home.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Prime Minister Hasbani, an urgent appeal, also putting this, framing it in that long-term, very needed approach to help these countries deal with this long-term issue. So again, looking at the importance of achieving the grants that these countries need, the level of commitment from European countries, considerable, perhaps not enough yet. Mark Lowcock, you are the Permanent Secretary of the UK Department for International Development. I should also say representing the Secretary of State for International Development, Priti Patel, who wasn't able to join us. It's good to have you. Just how important is this financing mechanism for your government? Are you doing enough? How committed are you in the long term? Can you do more?
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Priti Patel is really sorry not to be here. I'm sure a lot of people in the room understand the reason why she's not here, but she would really like to have been. First thing I want to say really is that this is the defining humanitarian crisis of our generation. And one of the things you learn when you deal with a defining crisis is what are the strengths of your existing system and what are the weaknesses of your existing system. And we have learned that there are some important weaknesses of the international community's ability to respond to very large, very long duration new crises. And as Imad Fakouri said, in London last year, we started to put together the building of a better new system, but we only made a start. And the defining features of that better new system firstly need to be a strong focus on helping the countries which are bearing this extraordinary burden in new and better and larger scale ways. And having a clear understanding of what the priorities are. If you talk to both the populations of Lebanon and Jordan themselves, or the refugees, the things you hear a lot about are an education for children and employment opportunities, and then, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, the strain on healthcare systems and infrastructure. So you need a strong focus on priorities, but then you need a long-term commitment. So our basic view is the GCFF has made very good progress in the first year. We were pleased to be initial contributors to it, but there are four big things we need to focus on into the next period if we're to really build a better system for the future. The first is we do all have to deliver the commitments we made in London. And a lot of that's been done, but it hasn't all been done. The second thing we have to do is close the financing gap for the next 4-year period. One of the last decisions Priti Patel took before our government closes down while the people decide who they want to form the next government is that we would put another £60 million, so $80 million, into the MDBs as part of the GCFF to help close the financing gap.
But you mentioned the gaps that still remain. I mean, there still seems to be not enough of a sense of urgency or commitment on the part of many countries. I mean, for years, refugees have been pouring into these two countries, Jordan and Lebanon, with these huge, very significant numbers. And we never heard very much about the issue. I mean, it really became a crisis when these refugees started reaching Europe. I mean, just to quote from something that the current Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who for many years was High Commissioner for Refugees, said before his appointment, I think it was about a year ago here in Washington, he said something to the effect that the refugee problem has not all of a sudden become more dramatic. What has changed is that refugees for the first time have come in big numbers to the rich world, and that there is a false idea in Europe that it is being invaded. I mean, is that triggering maybe a little bit more movement on the part of European countries? And how do you deal with this narrative?
Well, I think everybody is coming to a shared view that the best way to deal with the problem is as close as possible to where it started. And that's the way to use resources most efficiently. And certainly that's why in Brussels 2 weeks ago, my government announced that over the next 2 years, we would put another £1 billion into helping helping the victims of the crisis, and especially the neighbouring countries. But I think you're right to say that there are still failings in the system that are not being addressed, and we do need to build a better system for the future. One of the most important discussions we're going to be having this weekend in Washington is about how we build, in our forward-look discussion on the future role of the World Bank, a stronger ability of the bank group, with one of the world's biggest balance sheets of these problems, to respond at a bigger scale.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mark Lowcock. In many, of course, of these refugee situations, humanitarian crises, I think it's fair to say women and girls are the most affected, bearing the brunt of this forced displacement that often takes years. Marie-Claude Bibeau, you are Minister of International Development and La Francophonie of Canada. I know you're a passionate advocate of women's and girls' rights. I also know that you personally have visited Jordan and Lebanon and some of these refugee camps. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw in terms of challenges facing this group of refugees?
Yes, I've been to Jordan, Lebanon, Jordan twice, and Iraq recently. I visited camp, the Zatari camp, amongst others, and what struck me the most is all the psychosocial support that these people need. Thinking about these women who went through there are no names to qualify what they've been through. They've seen their family being killed, they've been raped. So we are working a lot with them on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And through these services, I visited the clinics, and talking with these women, I realized that they definitely need all this support towards SRHR, but they also need so much psychosocial support. That was very touching me. And talking about the children too, they also need friendly child space to reintegrate school. And it was very amazing to see the community in Jordan and in Lebanon opening the doors of their schools, making space. I mean, these families are they accept to have their kids in school only in the morning to give space for the refugees to have their kids in school. This was so generous. And talking with these families, these refugees, you can see that going back to school is getting back to a normal life. This is so important for these families, for these mothers, to feel that they give hope to their kids.
And talking about giving hope to these kids and women, to what extent does Canada, which is a part of the G7 groupings of developed countries, to what part does it see this issue in this humanitarian, human context as an investment as opposed to assistance? And other countries in this grouping, do you feel that they are beginning to have more of a consciousness about what is going on and the level of help that is needed?
Yes, we definitely have to share the burden with these neighboring countries who are facing the influx of refugees. Canada, well, we made a 3 years commitment towards the region. I think it goes with our commitment to be multi-year, flexible. We can foresee, so we make this commitment of $1.1 billion for development and humanitarian assistance for the region, including this contribution to the Global Concessional Financing Facility, and we're proud to do so. And we're happy with the work that is being done. It's being responsive to the needs of the countries. It's also very important that these funds benefit to the refugees, but also to the host communities. So it has to to help providing lasting infrastructure, expertise that will last through the years. So this is very important. But give me one more second to say how important it is to include gender analysis in these projects, and to go even further, because I was doing gender analysis 25 years ago. We have to go much further. We have to make sure that women are consulted at the beginning, that they are part of the decision making, that they will be involved and empowered through all these projects. So it has been shown that it will make a difference in the long term.